Prayer is the greatest exercise of faith a Christian can do. After all, you're praying to someone who is invisible, praying for something which only He can provide, and who answers you through nonverbal communications and often will speak to your heart through words that were written thousands of years ago. And He utilizes His invisible spirit who lives in your body. That is why it requires a lot of faith to pray. But not all prayer is prayer that pleases God, especially hypocritical prayer. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 5 to 8a, it says this, "And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly, I say to you that they have their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard by their many words." The Pharisees loved to pray, or should I say, perform, in public. Undoubtedly, the original public prayers were intended to help instruct the people on how to pray. But over the years, their prayers became traditions, and their traditions became unbreakable rituals. Jesus is not suggesting that standing while praying is wrong. Standing was a common posture for praying in public, and we do it today. But whether you are standing with your hands up or folded, or if you are kneeling, looking up or looking down, or if you are prostrate, or if you are walking or seated in any other posture, the key is that prayer is something that is to be done in humility. Prayer is never to be used as an opportunity to impress others with your eloquence, your language skills, memory, holiness, or any other personal attributes. By the time Jesus had arrived on the scene, their prayers consisted of long, memorized phrases, filled with nauseating repetition with enough volume to be heard at significant distance. They also thought that the longer the prayer, the more likely God would hear it. They had prayers for daytime, nighttime, fire, every weather condition, the new moon, good news, and bad news, and just about anything else you could think of. Essentially, for many of the Jews, their prayers had become no different than the prayers of the pagan nations around them. If you were within earshot of one of their public prayers and were not silent, you would be considered disrespectful and virtually sacrilegious. They also restricted their prayers to certain times of the day, mainly 9 a.m., 12 noon, and 3 p.m. Although it appeared their prayers were directed toward God, it wasn't God they were looking for a response from. It was from the people around them. It was another theatrical display of righteousness to draw attention to themselves. Of all the wrong things they were doing with their prayers, the one issue Jesus focuses on is the showing off in front of others. The two primary reasons this failure is so dangerous are it is distracting and it directed the attention of the people away from God to the person making the prayer, and it is deceptive in it implies that a person could become acceptable to God through outward works of righteousness rather than by the internal working of faith alone. To redirect this, Jesus quickly adds, "But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." The phrase, "when you pray," is a clear direction that there is no prescribed time or reason for prayer. As a matter of fact, the Apostle Paul exhorts us to always be in an attitude of prayer, according to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 18. Jesus is not banning public prayer. Throughout his ministry, as well as the apostles in the Old Testament, there are many examples of good public prayer, and he does not require that all prayer be in secret or restricted to a private room. Two main points being emphasized by Jesus are this. God should be the focus of all prayer because, by definition, prayer requires communion with God. And if you can't keep God in your focus and maintain communion with Him privately, how can you possibly do it publicly? One of the tremendous collateral benefits of private prayer happens when our children incidentally happen to overhear us. What an amazing positive impact it can have on their faith to hear their parents intimately and privately praying to God. Also, Jesus is not implying that God does not hear you except when you pray privately in a secret room. Whenever you call upon Him, He always hears you, and He never betrays your confidence in Him. The whole idea of privacy or secrecy is to further emphasize the uniquely intimate relationship we have with God in prayer. It is not about the words we use, it is about the thoughts of our heart. After all, the mouth is only a tool to communicate the heart to God, according to Matthew chapter 12, 34b. As a matter of fact, we are told in Romans chapter 8, 26, that we don't even have the right words to express to God what we mean, and that the Holy Spirit must make intercession for us. Throughout the Scriptures, God rewards those who approach Him in sincerity. When you approach the throne of grace in prayer with sincerity, God has promised to respond to you. He may not give you exactly what you're looking for, but He will give you everything you need to glorify Him in your life. In the first half of verse 8, Jesus says, "And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard by their many words." The words empty phrases means thoughtless chatter. It isn't babbling, it is mindless repetition that resembles the shallow ceremonial and lengthy religious pattern of the pagans who they mingled themselves with. Only they had perfected it to include rhythmic movement, which somehow gave more credence to their routine and robotic prayers that could just as easily have been prayed to a tree or a wall or a rock. The great sin in this is they were trying to get God's attention or leverage Him to act on their behalf through their self-afflicting chants. This is exactly what heathens do when they try to manipulate or intimidate their gods by badgering them until they wake up or recognize their responsibility to answer their prayer. This is really no different than what the prophets of Baal did on Mount Carmel to Elijah when he was taunting them, or the companions of Demetrius did to torment Paul, or Buddhists do when spinning their prayer wheels, or even Catholics when counting beads, or a rosary, or lighting candles to send prayers in some kind of recurring stream to God, or as some charismatics whose repetitive phrases eventually degenerate into unintelligible babble. Repeating a prayer is not wrong if there is a sincere and deep desire to communicate your thanks and desires to God. But repeating a prayer for the sake of just saying a prayer or because you have nothing else to say is worthless and it's offensive to God. Jesus did not forbid repeating a prayer for a genuine request or need. After all, the night of His betrayal, He prayed 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane for God to let this cup pass from me. Or do you remember the parable of the man who visits his neighbor in the middle of the night because he has a need in Luke chapter 11? He doesn't quit pounding on the door until his neighbor finally answers it. Or the widow who was persistent with the judge in Luke chapter 18. She just keeps coming to the court until he gives her what she wants. Or remember Paul, who requested of the Lord 3 times to remove his thorn in the flesh in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, until God told him, "No, my grace is sufficient for you." And we are told in James chapter 5, verse 16, that the fervent prayer of a righteous one has great power. And we are also told by Jesus to continue asking, seeking, and knocking in Matthew chapter 7. So pray, and pray often, and pray always. Wait, before you go, YouTube won't give me a donation button until I reach 1,000 subscribers. Please subscribe and share this video. It will really help the channel. Thank you so much.